We have a 6:30 p.m. start. And we are doing this remote via Zoom webinar platform. Action items on tonight's agenda after the approval of the minutes of March 15th and a public comment session will be 2 public hearings. We have 1 letter of recommendation and 1 new correspondence item, and then 1 other item on the town center plan update committee process. So moving on, Mr. Newberry, let's do a roll call of commission members.
Commissioner Helfrey.
Here.
Commissioner Ward.
Here.
Commissioner Cohn.
Here.
Commissioner Broyles.
Here.
Commissioner Beatty. Commissioner Depler.
Here.
Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Present.
Councilmember Brost.
Here.
Mayor Boland.
Okay, moving on. I would like a motion to either approve or amend the minutes from March 15th. Councilman Brost.
Yeah, motion to approve.
I
Okay,
second.
second, Commissioner Broyles. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes.
Thank you.
So moving on to the Department of Planning's opening remarks, Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I could do this at the end of the meeting, but maybe we will be a bit rushed to either see Hemingway on PBS or some basketball game that I hear is being played tonight. But just remember, with the action of the Planning and Zoning Commission last month, we will not meet again until the first Monday of May. So don't come on Zoom on the 3rd Monday of April. There'll be anybody there. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the public comment session, Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you noted earlier, we do have several in attendance via Zoom. Just want to give a bit of instruction. If anybody would like to speak during the general public comment session, not the public hearing, but the general public comment session, if they would raise their hand or indicate so in the chat, now would be the time to do so.
Okay. We'll wait a minute or so. Doesn't look like anybody wants to partake in the public comment session. Shall I move on to the public hearings? Okay, we'll go ahead and move to the next agenda item, which are the public hearings. In the city of Wildwood, public hearings are truly intended to accept comments and questions concerning the advertised items. Since these requests are being presented at a public hearing, no action is planned on them tonight, and consideration of these items is to be taken no earlier than May 3rd, 2021. The approach ensures that members of the Planning and Zoning Commission will hear all opinions before taking any action. The city's Department of Planning will address the comments, questions, and concerns that are raised tonight and include them as part of their formal recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The commission will allow all parties adequate time to present their positions. Those in attendance via Zoom webinar platform should use the raise hand feature to indicate that you wish to speak at this hearing, or indicate in the chat feature that you would like to speak. A team member will add you to the list of speakers that will then be communicated to me as chair, and I'll invite you to speak when it is your turn. In addition, information on these items can be found on the city's website at www.cityofwildwood.com. The commission would like to thank you for your cooperation and participation in tonight's hearing. So, Mr. Newberry, will you start us off with PZ 5-21?
Yes, sir. PZ 5-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request for the Planning and Zoning Commission to conduct a comprehensive review of, then consider potential changes to City of Wildwood's Municipal Code, Chapter 410, Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, and its associated landscape manual and sustainable plantings guide, for the purposes of ensuring such are consistent with current techniques, reflective of best practices, and accomplish the goals and objectives of the master plan of the City of Wildwood, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vinich, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before beginning the department's brief presentation on this particular item, I would like to first introduce into the record the following items: the Charter of the City of Wildwood, Chapter 415 of the City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the zoning ordinance, Chapter 410 of the City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, Chapter 420 of the City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the Subdivision and Development Regulations, Chapter 425 of the City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the Grading Code, the affidavit of publication of this particular hearing, and then finally, the file that has been developed and maintained regarding this particular item, including the department's primer that has been provided as part of tonight's packet for consideration. I would also note that any comments as part of the public hearing would be part of the official record on this particular petition. Before beginning, I do want to mention that a lot of the discussion that went into the preparation of the primer was accomplished between the Department of Planning and one of our city council members, Dr. Rambo. Dr. Rambo has a PhD. It's in this particular area, botany, I believe, and therefore he has a great wealth of knowledge and resources at hand to assist in discussions of such. Dr. Rambo has been integral in reviewing certain items relating to the reserve plan, and certainly his expertise has shown through as part of that review as well. So I do want to acknowledge his participation in these preliminary stages as we prepared for the public hearing. And certainly as we move forward, I think he'll be a great resource both for the Department of Planning, but more importantly, the Planning and Zoning Commission. I know here in April of 2021, it seems somewhat far-fetched to say that back in August and September of 1995, the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, as it was being developed, was considered very controversial. Up until that point, St. Louis County had not practiced a managed approach to tree preservation as part of development proposals submitted within what would become the City of Wildwood. There was an attempt at one Highland Summit on Strecker Road. It was the first of such across the entirety of the unincorporated county, but for the most part was not replicated thereafter. Obviously, the incorporators and then other elected and appointed officials since that time, 1995, have seen the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code as key to creating an approach that would be systematic and protective of the unique environment in Wildwood, but also acknowledge that not all trees are created equal, and some are of certain character deserving of special protection. Fast forward to the 2020, the pandemic year, and The department, along with many on the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, were receiving feedback relative to development proposals in the town center area. Though much of that feedback reflected concerns about the extent of tree removal and how grand trees were being protected. That led to certain steps to proceed forward with a comprehensive review. A review had occurred in 2017 at the urging of Mayor Boland relative to grand trees, and improvements, in the opinion of the department, were made to the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code relative to that particular topic. But as we were finding out in 2020, there were still concerns being expressed about the selection of materials for landscaping after the development had occurred, the restoration component, and other items relating to just tree protection, as those that were being saved often along the perimeter or edge were not necessarily doing well in terms of survival. Factor in Dr. Rambo and his expertise, and it became apparent that we needed to take a long and hard look at the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code. In the primer that's been provided, there is a table that for the most part provides the explanation the department wants to offer tonight. There is the code itself, which contains the regulations, the enabling items that allows the city of Wildwood to review trees as part of any development proposal or subdivision that might be submitted to the city council. But as part of that set of regulations, there are two key components associated with it: the landscape manual and the sustainable planning's guide. The code contains the regulations. It also references and enables these two key guides. It defines and protects grand trees, and it establishes a hierarchy of preservation and the coordination between other environmental codes of the city. The landscape manual, which hasn't been updated since 1996, contains the parameters for tree stand delineations, tree preservation plans, and equally important, landscape plans that follow. And so as you can see, the landscape manual is a key component of the overall code. And then finally, more recently, the Sustainable Planning's Guide was adopted by the City Council after review and recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And that talks about plantings and tree types that are sustainable for the Wildwood community, given our climate, our weather, our soils, our geology, our runoff, etc. It talks about planting locations, shade or sun, quantity and sizes, and other characteristics. Along with those three, the department has identified what it believes are some possible additions, deletions, or other modifications for consideration. And those are categorized by either the regulations, the landscape manual, or the sustainable planning guide. I do want to emphasize too, as part of this comprehensive analysis of this set of regulations and the two key components of them, the department has identified resources that it would like to utilize in support of its effort, which is in support of the Planning and Zoning Commission's effort as well. And those would be the Missouri Department of Conservation, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Missouri Botanical Garden, Davie Resource Group, which our city uses as a consultant, Mayor Boland and the city council members that have offered comments over the course of the last year plus of time, Wildwood property owners, those that may be impacted or benefit from new regulations, the Wildwood Business Association, and then finally others that may want to participate, whether it be an individual resident, group of residents, or source pertaining to our process. Tonight, it is And the intent of the public hearing is to hear a brief presentation from the department on context, why we are here, why we are talking about Chapter 410, the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, to highlight its key components and sections, and then, well, most importantly, hear from the public about what they feel is good about the regulations and the components bad, what needs to be added, what needs to be deleted, and anything else that may be on their minds. So tonight, the task is just beginning. I believe this will take some time to complete because we certainly want to utilize our resources, and at the end of the process, have a set of regulations, a landscape manual, and a sustainable planning guide that we can all feel that will achieve the goals that we started out in 1995 and have learned that are still primary in many of our residents' minds. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude the department's presentation. I'll accept any comments or questions at this time. And then as we go through the public comment, Mr. Newberry and I will make sure we record them as accurately as possible and address them as part of our report when we move forward to that stage of the process. Thank you for your attention. And again, I'm available for any questions or comments along with Mr. Newberry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Okay, we'll open this up for discussion. First, Mr. Newberry, do we have anybody on our chat participants that would like to speak on this item?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have several in attendance still. I'll just give a quick brief instruction. Again, if you would like to speak to this public hearing item, please use the raise hand feature or put it in the chat and you'll be promoted to address the commission regarding this matter.
And Mr. Chair, if you could give us just a few seconds or 10 seconds or so we can give people the time. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we do have someone typing in the chat. Let me promote him into panelists. And this is Mr. Williams.
Yes. I can go ahead and read his comment here. He said, specific question regarding the Asian bush honeysuckle. Is there any reason these should not be cleared? I think I can answer that. We'd like to eradicate all of it out of Wildwood. But you shouldn't burn it.
Mr. Chair, this may be more of a specific property question, and I do want to, with your permission, address it. Obviously, bush honeysuckle is an invasive. It, in many regards, has taken over the understory of many of our woodland areas and has reduced what I once would have considered a very ecologically or environmentally diverse forest floor to almost a monoculture in many regards. However, its removal must be done with caution in that the Department of Planning and our Department of Public Works are required to ensure that it is only invasives that are being removed in advance of any type of development or use of property. So oftentimes what we asked is for a simple honeysuckle or invasive removal plan. That plan is then reviewed. And so if the city does receive questions, we have the information at hand and can respond to the questions accurately and eliminate any confusion that might occur at the site. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we do have another hand up. Ms.
Go
Williams.
ahead and let them.
Yep. Thank you.
I apologize. I think my husband beat you to the punch, beat me to the punch on raising my hand. But I did want to say that the Tree Preservation Act is something that makes Wildwood very attractive for people to move into the area. And I think that we both would say we fully support the changes that you're making, and the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources guidance on tree preservation.
Thank you for your comment. Commissioner Cohn.
I was just curious of the department's view of property owners using the services of the goat lady to get rid of all honeysuckle and other types of vegetation, understory.
It's a very good question, Mr. Cohn, and I know more about one particular goat operation here in Wildwood that received a simplified conditional use permit from the city. And the results are fairly amazing when you look at areas pre-goat and then after goat. They are effective at what they do. And from the information I received from the owner of the goats that rents them out to different locations for their services, they do not necessarily harm the trees or other types of vegetation. And so all in all, it seems like an appropriate approach as part of a complete or comprehensive set of approaches. It may not be the best approach for all instances, but certainly is one that can work in certain locations.
I'd like to add that I used the goat lady at my home. She brought over 42 goats, a portable electric fence to contain the goats. And it was amazing what they could do in 3 days. The area is clean. And after the goats left, she came back with a small chainsaw and then eliminated all the little tiny, like 1 inch in diameter, what was left of some of the after effect of massive goat eating. It really cleared up areas and I saw parts of my property I've never seen since I lived here. So I recommend her highly.
Mr. Newberry, do you want to repeat the business name for Angela Williams? Or Commissioner Cohn?
Lee, I think it's called Goats on the Go.
Goats on the Go?
Mr. Chair, I believe Dr. Rambo has his hand raised and would like to speak. If we can promote him, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Newberry, go ahead.
Hello, folks. I intended to lurk. I wasn't prepared to participate necessarily. I'll get my chance to do that. I'm not sure the protocols here. I just wanted to, first of all, state my enthusiastic support for this effort. I think it's needed after a quarter century. Things have changed, and we, as a society, know more about tree preservation and so forth, but also about the ecology in general. And there are a lot of moving parts associated with all of these things. The Native Plantings Guide has species on it that are now considered invasive and are causing problems for folks, including on my own property. The reason I raised my hand was to comment on the goat thing. It's one tool in the toolbox. It's a great thing for folks that just have a thicket and a mess and they want to clean things up. But while they're eating a lot of mostly honeysuckle, they are, and some olive and so forth, they're also eating a whole lot of desirable stuff. And so it's incumbent on us as we inform people of the availability of goat rentals, that we let them know the downside, and maybe even refer to some sort of a plantings guide of identification guide of the desirable plants that the goats are going to be eating when they're eating the honeysuckle, because otherwise you wind up with bare dirt and you have to replant. And some folks buy a pasture mix, and then we have orchard grass, and we have barnyard grass, and we have fescue, and we have those kinds of things, which are themselves quite invasive. And if no one is interested in a horse pasture necessarily, there are better things to have. And if you already have them growing, there's no sense in trying to recreate a healthy forest. So there's a lot to be said about this. I'm passionate about it. I have my own little tree farm and whatnot, but I didn't intend to do anything other than offer my general support for this review of the ordinances. So thanks very much for the time.
Thank you for your comment. One thing that I want to throw out here is that the forest floor around my property here in Ward 4, we have woodlands, I guess, between subdivisions. The actual forest floor outside of honeysuckle is pretty much non-existent because of the deer. They basically ravage everything that comes up that would be a nice tree, acorns. They eat all of our plants that are supposed to be deer resistant as well. So I think if we could have an issue with that, if we're trying to reestablish the forest floor, the deer need to be a component of this as we move forward, because we are probably 4 times the population of a natural sustainable deer herd, at least where I am.
Mr. Chair, with your permission,
Yes, go ahead.
a subcommittee of the Board of Public Safety is looking at the deer population issue. Mr. Brown, our Director of Public Works, and Mr. Cross, our City Administrator, have been participating with that subcommittee. And I know they are making progress on some options. Recognized problem that beyond just the bush honeysuckle, olive, and other invasives, the deer population, particularly when it's in excess of what the carrying capacity of the land is certainly doing some harm as
Commissioner Broyles.
I need some clarification. I was given some information about honeysuckle from, I can't remember which person it was from the city at this time, but it's my understanding that it's not just eating the leaves off the trees, it's also digging out the roots to that and not laying them on the ground, because they'll just reimagine themselves again. Is that truthful? We need to take the roots out?
Mr. Bunich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Broyles, the St. Louis, the Open Space Council of St. Louis has done a number of invasive removals of bush honeysuckle along our trail system. Typically, what we've been told is that they basically cut the bush honeysuckle down to, let's say, the base of the trunk, and then they treat it with some type of chemical. They found that to be the most effective approach instead of trying to dig out the root system itself.
Well, I know the smaller pieces that I've pulled out myself, but if it's a large piece, there's no way. And is there somehow we could find that chemical that's used?
Yes, and I'm confident with the Open Space Council, they're using something that's most appropriate for that. So again, Dr. Rambo's raised his hand, and so I'll let him respond.
And non-toxic.
Well, that would be my hope, but again,
Humans.
there's a balancing act between what the bush honeysuckle is doing to the forest and what maybe a little chemical will do as well. So I'll defer to Dr. Rambo on this particular issue.
Thank you.
Dr. Rambo?
Yeah, hi there, folks. I will be very brief. This is something that we need to include in our updated documentation somehow. Essentially, honeysuckle removal is part art, part science, and part black art. But the specific question that you asked, there's a chemical, it's called glyphosate, and it's not the most benign chemical around, but it is less noxious than some other chemicals. And the advantage to using glyphosate, it comes in you can buy it in a big honking jug, 41% glyphosate. You cut it by 2, so use 20% glyphosate. And once you've got the stump exposed, that's, let's say it's 6 inches high, all you need to do is just paint a little bit around the cambium layer. It's called the outer circle of the stump, and it will kill it dead. I do it quite often in November, December time frame, and I have 95+% success with just a tiny little bit of that chemical. The other use for that chemical is at a 3% concentration, but that's spraying the foliage, and you're spraying that stuff all over creation. The wind drifts it, so forth. It's just not a good thing. I have to walk around in a mask when I do that, but I do it just only in certain areas because I don't have goats. So the chemical is called glyphosate. It's also known as Roundup. There's lots of discussion concerning the toxicity of that particular chemical. And so I have a full face mask, and I only spray it on calm days, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're doing, if you have even a large area, an acre or 2 of honeysuckle that you want to remove, I strongly suggest getting a brush cutter, whacking it off at 6 inches, and then just painting the stumps, or going around with a $11 Home Depot garden sprayer and spraying the stumps. And what I always do is put a little bit of dye in the chemical so that I can see the ones that I've sprayed. And so I don't double up, because the dye goes away in a month. So that's the most environmentally friendly way to do it, because you don't get a lot of overspray, and you minimize your use of chemical, and you don't have to dig, because again, there's no free lunch, and digging causes lots of other problems with your forest floor. So thanks for the opportunity to answer that question. I will revert to lurking now.
Thank you, Dr. Rambo. Mayor Boland.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. First of all, as all of you know, this is an issue that's very near and dear to me, and I could not be happier about our grand tree ordinance that we passed a few years ago. And I look forward to continuing to see what we can do relative to protecting the trees in our city, because as Ms. Williams pointed out earlier, one of our residents, this is really and truly one of the things that makes our city unique, not only relative to St. Louis County, but also for the state of Missouri. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge fellow Commissioner Helfrey for her beautiful background. Only in Wildwood do you attend a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting with a forest behind you. And that says it all. Thank you so much for doing that, Commissioner Helfrey.
Thank you.
I live to entertain. I do have a question.
Commissioner Helfrey.
My question is regarding street trees in the subdivisions. I guess I'm hoping that since we're addressing all of this stuff, that maybe we can find some way to give some clarity to neighborhoods regarding street trees, plantings, trimming, maintenance, disease control. Mr. Munich knows that we've struggled with this for a while. in our subdivision. And I just want to make sure, because there's, I don't think there's a universal understanding of the street trees in subdivisions. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can get some clarity on that. Thank you.
Mr. Vunich.
Commissioner Helpfrey, I think that's an excellent suggestion, like the others we've heard to date. And so we'll spend a lot of time, both Mr. Brown and our other resources, looking at how we handle street trees, not only as we prepare them for planting and once planted, but once the subdivision is completed and they're in front of people's homes, and how we best communicate what we can do, what we can't do, and what they can do and what they can't do.
Commissioner Helfrey? Okay. Mr. Vunich, I had one question which comes back to the landscape plan and documents that is it your intention that the city prepare something with the outcome of this?
Yes, sir. Back in the early 1990s and then around 1995, the time of the city's incorporation, buffer yards were somewhat trendy. And as you can see, we depend on buffer yards and planning units almost entirely within the context of new landscaping components for projects that are proposed in the city. And I'd like to investigate that to see if it's still the best approach, buffer yards and planting units, or if there's something better out there we can discover and at least present to you for consideration.
Okay, thank you. If Dr. Rambo's on again, I'd like to ask him about what the forest floor plant material should be, since what we have is honeysuckle and then very little of anything else.
Back and forth, back and forth. Sorry, folks. Yeah, it's one of those things. Don't get me started because I'll talk all night because I love this stuff. But essentially, the hardest thing about what I'm doing in terms of, I have about 50 acres, been in family forever, and I'm trying to get it back to the way it was when the Native Americans were the only folks here. And that's tough for two reasons. The invasives that have been around since my grandmother's name, my grandmother's day, I curse her name constantly because of the honeysuckle. But there are also invasives that have been planted more recently. We have, if you drive down Manchester Road or Highway 100 right now, you see nothing but Callery pear, for example. It's horrible, it's horrendous. All those beautiful white trees that you see for about 2 weeks in the spring, we don't want any of those. But to your point specifically, there are a host of native plants, hundreds upon hundreds, that have thrived in this area for eons. That's what we probably should try to get back to. A forest floor, you're not going to get to a point where you can have a beautiful green lawn underneath trees. That's an artificial environment. We'd never had that around here. But what you can get to is something flowering all the time. The pollinators are happy, the wildlife are happy, and you have multiple stories, some of which are only a foot or two tall, and growing on up to 15, 20, 30 feet and so forth, all with natives that sort of look similar to the honeysuckle bushes that we don't like. So you can just kind of substitute and have the same appearance. Maybe keep it more open or whatever. It's a very broad question. I know I'm not answering it, but I'm trying to offer hope that there are ways to, there are inexpensive ways to seed native plants and have them establish themselves. They're generally perennials, and you can sort of choose what colors you want, what height you want, what's, the aggressiveness based on the soil characteristics and the sunlight characteristics and what you're looking for, you can generally find something that will work for you from a list of native plantings, which is why the plantings guide is so important. I have the last thing I'll say, because I don't know when to quit when it comes to this stuff. I will say that I 100% feel your pain with the deer population. Some parts of my yard look like a feedlot all winter long, because we're supposed to have a healthy population is 10 to 20 deer per square mile, and we have 80 or 100 per square mile, and I can't get anything to grow. Anything you plant, you have to cage for a decade until it gets 8 feet high, so that they can no longer eat strip every leaf. And so it's a challenge, but seeds are cheap. And if for example, if you did your goat thing, you can buy literally a few $100s worth of seeds, put it out at the right time of year before the snows, work it into the soil. And they say it takes 1 to go, meaning the first year you're just going, 1 to grow, meaning it's establishing the root system, and 1 to show. And so by the 3rd year, you have a beautiful variety of flowers all year long. The birds love them. The butterflies love them, the bees love them, and you'll love them. It just takes a while to get it established, but it's pretty easy to do, particularly if you have a bare area, because you had some goats in there. So hopefully that gave you some encouragement. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, you did. And what I'd like to do is incorporate some of this forest floor items into our tree preservation criteria.
Yes, sir. That is the key. That's the key, because we have great trees, and the climate's getting weirder, and some trees are dying. I have 200 near grand and grand ash trees that are dead on my property right now. So things are happening, and next, the gypsy moths are going to come for the white oaks. And so what we need to do is build resilience into our environment. And the best way to do that is with native plantings that are adapted to harsher conditions and so forth. So that's the key to this whole thing, is protecting some of the grand trees, but also getting the planting list and the associated documentation, like the question about the honeysuckle and so forth, getting those in the groove. That's really going to help us as a community going forward. And some of that doesn't really exist to date, so we'll have to think of a new category for that. But thanks very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. We welcome your opinion. Mr. Vunich or Mr. Newberry, do we have anybody online?
Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Jackson is raising his hand.
Okay, I'll come back to Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, just curious, the Conservation Department, they have a program where they come do a forest assessment. So my subdivision is a very old forest, and they come in and they give you forest restoration plan is basically what it is. Is that going to be part of this program? Because I think that could be very beneficial. So the ash trees that were dying, they come in, they'll have people, they'll cut the pole timber out, which makes pallets, right? And then they'll assess all the forest, and they'll cut certain trees out so the forest thrives and grows better. I'm just curious if that'll be part of this. That in my subdivision, we have a very old forest. Trees are just going to keep dying. I mean, it's really old. It definitely needs to be thinned out correctly.
Mr. Jackson, the current tree preservation and restoration code does authorize timber sales in certain instances. A key component of that authorization by the city is having an approved Missouri Department of Conservation tree management plan. And so we take that into account. But as mentioned at the start of the public hearing and the department's presentation, we're going to lean heavily on the Missouri Department of Conservation to provide us that expertise so that timber management, protection of certain trees, the restoration of the forest floor, those are all areas I feel that they are the experts in and can certainly lend us support if we seek it.
Mr. Newberry, is there anybody else?
Mr. Chair, I've not seeing anybody in the current attendees with their hands up or in the chat. We'll just give it a few moments. Mr. Chair, Dr. Rambo has raised his hand on Zoom again.
Okay, Dr. Rambo.
Sorry, guys. I really didn't intend to filibuster your meeting, but the Mr. Jackson referred to what's known as a TSI, a Timber Stand Improvement Program, or an FSI, which are different things. The FSI takes a more holistic approach and wants to make a healthy, nice forest for the wildlife and the birds and the other little critters and so forth. Whereas TSI is a timber management plan, which the intention is to create tall, straight, commercial logs, hopefully veneer quality logs. And I'm excited by the support for forest stand improvement as part of our ordinances and so forth, because forest stand improvement can mean anything. You might have areas where 30% canopy is appropriate and somewhere 70 or 80% canopy is appropriate, depending on what you want on the ground and the use for the land beneath the trees and so forth. And so there's an art to that as well, but it's a great thing for us to be thinking in just such holistic terms. And I couldn't be more pleased to hear those kinds of comments from folks. And I think we can do a much better job that everyone will be thrilled with the results. So that's just another word of encouragement. And thanks a lot for letting me talk again.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so I'll give it another minute and then maybe a motion to close this public hearing. Commissioner Helfrey.
Sorry, so my question is for Mr. Vunich. Joe, once this is closed today, then going forward, then might I understand that that you will then take all of our suggestions and put together something for us and bring it back to us to digest?
Yes, ma'am. I think the context of this particular set of regulations, particularly when you take into account the landscape manual and the sustainable planning guide, probably needs to be given to you in bites, not necessarily as the whole, because I think it would probably be doing you a disservice to understand the direction that each component is taking. So that is the intent, is we build toward the final product that you'll see, let's say, drafts of the different components as we go through the process.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I've been taking notes while we've been talking. And I have the sustainable planting guide, I have the tree manual. Is there a way, I could not find a copy of the grand tree policy that we passed a couple of years ago. Is there a way that you can email that to us too? And then I think there was one other document.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Helfrey, the actual grand tree requirements are part of the code itself, chapter 410. And so that should be part of the packet already. It, for the most part, is just a single paragraph within the set of regulations. And I think that is part of the reason that we want to take another look at it. As mentioned, we made improvements in 2017, but I think there are other things we could do now, given the expertise we have both on City Council with Dr. Rambo and others, and the intended resources we'd like to contact.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, Mr. Rambo really sparked my memory. I was thinking with my subdivision how difficult it would be to get all the subdivision people together to have the conservation department and also the city of Wildwood to come in and do a TSI survey or whatever it is. I think it'd be really great if there was a how-to guide of how to go about these things. Like, what are the processes? What do you need to do? I know we're talking about a new plan, but maybe have something, a how-to guide. What's the process and how should you follow it to have these improvements? That's just a general comment. I don't have a suggestion, just a comment.
Mr. Chair, I would like to think that's an outgrowth of the process that at the end
That
of
will
the day,
part
we
of
have
it, I
some-
would imagine. Yeah, as this develops. And a lot of our wood lines are required wood lines from subdivisions and so forth for our connectivity. The Greenway Beltway, all those areas are impacted with this, I would imagine. Okay, I think we need to move on. Need a motion to close this hearing. Commissioner Helfrey? And a second by Councilman Brost. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, moving on. Mr. Newberry, PZ 6-21.
PZ 6-21, 1733 Stones Throw Drive, care of Jeffrey Erb, 173 Stones Throw Drive, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038. A request for a change in zoning from the PS Park and Scenic District to the NU Non-Urban Residence District upon a parcel of ground that is 0.53 acres in size, which is located on the north side of Stones Throw Drive at its current terminus. The property was previously owned by St. Louis County, Missouri, and was part of Greensfelder County Park. Now, the subject parcel of ground is under the private ownership of the petitioner, such being duly established by an approved boundary adjustment plat between the appropriate parties. Ward 6.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich, turn it over to you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, while Mr. Newberry was reading the request into the record, I promoted Mr. Erb, the property owner of the subject of tonight's discussion. I would just note that Mr. Erb is a recent purchaser of the lot. The previous owners of the lot constructed a side entry garage as part of their single-family dwelling. A portion of the apron that serves that side entry garage and the driveway crossed the property line and encroached into Greensfelder County Park. The property owners and St. Louis County worked out a solution. That solution was to transfer a portion of the park where the improvements were located to the property owners, and then the property owners dedicated an equal amount back to the park on the west side of the lot. Mr. Erb is here tonight because he would like to do an improvement on that portion of the property that is now occupied in part by the driveway apron and the driveway. The current zoning would not allow it, and so it's prompted the rezoning request before you tonight. I've given a summary of the primer. I'm sure Mr. Erb can provide better details than I just did, so I'll close and thank you. And if there are any questions for Mr. Newberry or I, we'd be glad to try to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry, could you promote Mr. Erb?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Erb is one of the panelists on the webinar.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. So we purchased this home, closed on it on September 28th, and understood exactly as he described that the portion of the lot had to be given up to the park to obtain the portion that the driveway was built on. And that was, the previous owners that built the home had that done in 2011, as I recall. And it just didn't get rezoned to non-urban to match the house. Because it was previously part of the park, it stayed as park rather than having that change done. So this is an area where I want to build a detached garage across from the current attached garage.
Okay, so I guess, Mr. Newberry, could you throw the exhibit up that has the
Yes, Mr.
lot and the garage? Because essentially sounds like just cleanup from what was already granted, and we're just correcting the zoning.
Yes, Mr. Chair, give me a moment. I'm having trouble
Yeah.
finding it. I have it open. I just can't find it on my Zoom. Mr. Chair, would you like me to narrate the slide or?
Yes, go ahead and narrate.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, this is the boundary adjustment plat that was included in the packet. The blue triangle is the subject area where Mr. Erb would like to build the detached garage that currently is zoned PS Park and Scenic District. And the red area that's identified is just the property that Mr. Vunich mentioned to the west of the property that was dedicated to the park. And I do have a few photos of the site if you'd like me to proceed with those.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go through the photos.
Okay. The first is just another aerial shot of the home with the topography identified. The first photo is looking to the north towards the triangular shaped parcel. The basketball hoop is the edge of the driveway that was identified. This is just a little bit of a closer up look at it. And then on this photograph, this tree here, where my cursor is labeled, is flagged as one of the property lines of the diagonal section of the triangle. And then this is just a photograph of the site looking to the south. And then this is a photograph of where the drive bends looking to the north up the hill towards where the home is. That concluded the photographs that were taken.
Thank you. Mr. Vunich, what action are we doing, or what is your request, I guess?
Well, first and foremost, if there are any of the attendees that would like to speak in favor or opposition to the rezoning request, this would be an opportune time to raise your hand or identify such in chat. If there are no other public speakers, the department would respectfully request a motion and second and voice vote to close the hearing. And then the department will prepare the recommendation regarding the requested rezoning for action by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Helfrey.
Thank you. Mr. Vunich, if we have to, it sounds like this is a cleanup item, and if we have to if we need to rezone where the driveway is to non-urban, do we also need to rezone the red triangle to Parks and Recreation?
It is the intent of the department to do such, but given the desire to address Mr. Erb's request and not necessarily wait on St. Louis County to process the request through its channels, we'll follow up with St. Louis County and probably bring back something at a future date. But I was afraid that if we waited for the Department of Parks and Recreation at St. Louis County to take it through the county executive's office, then county council, it could be months before we were in a position to address Mr. Erb's need.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, I've got a lot of concerns on this one. I want to accommodate the new landowner, the new property owner. This should have been stopped a long time ago. They built it asking for forgiveness. That's on the onus of the landowner to make sure things are surveyed correctly. And then when you buy property as well, probably going to go along with this one. But what kind of precedent does this set, within Wildwood in general? Seen a few things where, you build it, ask for forgiveness later. I'm just saying, I'm really hesitant on these items. When you're asking for forgiveness later, when we have an enforcement, and I'm probably going to go along with this one for sure because I feel for the guy, but this should have been stopped a long time ago. It's just a general statement. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. One thing I will comment on, and then Commissioner Cohn can as well, but when you run title, the property came up as his property on what would have been the title report. And I'm not sure the zoning would have been reflected in that, being an underlying zoning issue. It just wasn't followed up.
Well, zoning fixes this problem from Parks and Recreation. So we're fixing it so he can make his adjustments when it should have stayed zoned as is. That's my commentary.
Yeah, Commissioner Cohn.
I was just going to add, when you do run title when you purchase property, typically the zoning does not show up on the commitment. You would, as a purchaser, would request a certificate or a letter of zoning from the municipality, but it would not come on a title report. So there should have been a complete surprise to the purchaser, and that's something that he's really actually asking forgiveness for.
And I'm for that, Mr. Cohn, because it's the previous owner that caused this problem. Okay, not this guy. And so that's why I said I'd probably go along with it. But the previous owner knew better. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Boland.
Yeah, just to synthesize the comments for clarification, and Commissioner Jackson just pointed out that the issue really occurred with the prior owner. And relative to the commitment and ultimate policy of title insurance, Commissioner Cohn is correct that those do not show necessarily the zoning areas, but Commissioner Jackson is also correct that the prior owner of the property should have had a survey done that would have delineated those issues. But nevertheless, Mr. Erb, I think we all agree, is asking us to look at, this evening and ultimately when we decide, presumably at our next meeting, whether his proposed use of that land and the change in it is agreeable. And so I just want to make clear that Mr. Erb is not the person who did something wrong here. In fact, Mr. Erb is the person who's coming to us after the fact, having bought this land with the issue that had occurred, to ask us to look at it ahead of what he plans to do. So he is not, just for clarification, the person who is looking for forgiveness after having done something. He's doing quite the opposite. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, I'll need a motion to close this hearing. Commissioner Helfrey,
I'll make a motion to close.
I have a motion on the floor. Need a second? Commissioner
Second.
Depler? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
And any abstentions? Okay, so it looks like it passes. We had one opposition, Councilman Brost.
No, I was in favor. I was
Oh,
just
you were in favor?
late.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, delayed? Okay.
Sorry.
So, then it passes, no opposition. Okay. We can move on. We have one old business item, PZ 01-21. Mr. Newberry.
PZ 01-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning 16860, Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri 63040. They request to consider the inclusion of certain properties located within the City of Wildwood, Missouri for their respective identifications and placements on a master map for inclusion in the Special Circumstances Overlay District, subject to the application of Chapter 415.505. Special Circumstances Overlay District Regulations. Given the following conditions, characteristics, or environmental physical features that exist upon or have been identified in the past, causing such needed extra scrutiny to be considered necessary to ensure the public's health, safety, and general welfare. Number one, any property, lot, parcel of ground, and or tract of land that has been listed or delisted from any federal, state, or local registry relative to environmental contamination from any actions leading to a determined or yet to be determined threat to the public's health, safety, and general welfare. And number two, any property, lot, parcel of ground, and or tract of land that is located downstream from any site which has been listed or delisted from any federal, state, or local registry relative to environmental contamination and being said defined by the drainage network that provides the conduit for the offsite migration of potential contaminants. And three, any property, lot, parcel of ground, and or tract of land that has been identified on a current or past phase 1 environmental assessment conducted upon it that identifies or has identified the need for a phase 2 environmental assessment to be completed upon the same. 4, any property, lot, parcel of ground, and or tract of land that is located upon it any portion of the main channel of its floodway area of any of the 9 named watershed which are located within the City of Wildwood, but not inclusive of any portion of the same designated as 100-year floodplain by the federal insurance rate maps of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And 5, any property, lot, parcel of ground, and or tract of land that has over 50% of its land area that exhibits an unaltered slope or grade that exceeds 33% as measured by generally accepted standards and practices of the civil engineering fields. And 6, any property, lot, parcel of ground, and or tract of land that is hereafter determined to meet the definitions and requirements of the Special Circumstances Overlay District regulations to be subject to them, or as may be requested by the property owner or owner under contract of same said locations, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight the draft letter of recommendation regarding the matter that Mr. Newberry just read into tonight's record. As you know, for the past year-plus period of time, the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council have been discussing the Special Circumstances Overlay District. First, it was the regulations establishing such overlay district. And now the second component is the definition of categories that would be considered for placement or for use in determining individual sites, lots, or properties. That is the third phase, the actual rezoning of certain properties based upon these categories. And that will be the next step that will follow with the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. At the Planning and Zoning Commission March 15th meeting, by a vote of 8-0, the Planning and Zoning Commission members supported and are recommending the 6 categories as identified as part of the letter of recommendation in its draft form. I do want to note that relative to category 5, which relates to topography, the department has attempted over the course of the last month to provide a sampling, so to speak, of those sites that would fit these characteristics. And the department believes that the best approach is to do them on a case-by-case basis upon submittal of a development proposal, very similar to category 6. So tonight, the department is basically categorizing the first 4 of them as those that have definable and easily recognizable characteristics for the special circumstances overlay district, while the final 2 categories, number 5 and number 6, can be done on a case-by-case basis, as was discussed at previous meetings. Therefore, tonight, the draft letter of recommendation is in the appropriate form to forward on to City Council for its review and potential action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunich. I'll open this up for discussion or entertain a motion. Commissioner Broyles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 5 and 6. Joe, can those words, the case-by-case basis, be placed in those 2 so that's very clear? Can those words be placed in those sentences?
Mr. Broyles, if the maker and second of the motion add that as part of the action to approve the draft letter of recommendation, yes, the department would add those in.
Then I do that. I add those 2 case-by-case basis into 5 and 6. That's a motion.
That's a motion.
Can you read 5 and 6? I'm sorry, or just the high points of them.
Certainly, sir. Number 5 is any property, lot, parcel of ground and or tract of land that has over 50% of its land area that exhibits an unaltered slope or grade that exceeds 33% as measured by generally accepted standards and practices of the civil engineering field. Number 6, any property, lot, parcel of ground and or tract of land that is hereafter determined to meet the definitions and requirements of the special circumstances overlay district regulations to be subject to them, or as may be requested by the owner or owner under contract of the same said location.
Okay, I may be a little confused, but does this proposal tie our hands with, we have, and please help me with the name of it, the large subdivision that's possibly going in east of 100 that could affect flood issues? Does this tie our hands with any decisions in that matter?
Mr. Jackson, I believe you're referencing the reserve, and I do not believe it does. In the instance of the reserve, we do have very specific preliminary development plans from Stock and Associates. And first and foremost, the majority of the site does not exceed a 33% slope. And so category 5 would not be applicable. And again, based upon aerial photography dating back to 1937, the property has never been developed with any structures, buildings, or any type of activity other than farming that would cause one to be concerned that there is the other 4 categories: an NPL site, a phase 1 or phase 2 type of activity, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. I just want to make sure our hands are not tied in other matters. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
So Commissioner Broyles has a motion. I haven't seen a second yet, but one question I had, I guess, would be for City Attorney Young. As this is written, I'm not sure we need to identify anything as case by case because that's what's understood here. So I wanted to see what the opinion is here.
Well, I don't think it does any harm, Mr. Chair, because you're absolutely right. Each property is going to be reviewed based upon its own merits set forth in the criteria that you're setting forth today. But it's certainly implied, but I don't think there's any harm in having the requirement.
That being said, we still have a motion. Mayor Boland.
But when you get a second, I'll ask my question.
Okay.
I can second it.
Commissioner Ward seconds. Okay, I'll go back to Mayor Boland.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So John, to follow up on Chair Lee's question relative to the need to actually specifically identify these properties in such a formal way, is there any potential downside to that? I mean, in other words, what if at some point the city decides that the property should not be included within the scope of this? Are we going to have another hearing to do that? Or is there a different, more efficient way perhaps to handle these rather than dragging all of these up through the Planning and Zoning Commission and potentially the City Council every time we want to put something within the scope of this?
Well, that is the only way to do it, is to actually go through that entire process each time you want to put any property within the subject of the SCOD, because the SCOD is an overlay zoning district. And to apply that zoning district to a piece of property requires effectively a rezoning of that property, which means notice, public hearing, P&Z action, council action.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That answers the question.
Mr. Vunich, is this going to be kind of a one-off for numbers 5 and 6, or do we actually have areas that could be identified as that satisfy this criteria today?
Well, Mr. Chair, as mentioned, with regards to category 5, the department attempted to use best available topographic information, which is often either from St. Louis County or the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. And what I was finding is between the aerial photography and the number of topographic lines, it was hard to make that determination. Whereas if someone were to submit a property with a preliminary development plan, that characterization would be much simpler to undertake, and it'd be on a case-by-case basis or site-by-site. And so that's why the department feels that at least category 5 and previously category 6 are reasonable to retain, because they do give us that flexibility that if something comes in, we can better address it through this special circumstances overlay district versus the planned residential development overlay district, or no overlay district at all.
Well, with that statement, though, we would need to have this identified as a special circumstances overlay district ahead of when the development arrived.
Not necessarily in the opinion of the department. As we do with any proposal, if someone were to come in and say, you know, there's these characteristics on the property we want to avoid, this floodplain area we want to avoid, this glade we want to utilize, this ridge, how best to do that? Oftentimes we recommend the planned residential development overlay district. In this case, if someone were to come in and say, in the case of category 5, there's so much slope on this property that we're concerned with its utilization, but still want to proceed forward. In that instance, the department would be inclined to say that the special circumstances overlay district is more appropriate, given concerns about the impacts of development of steep slopes on the waterways, the downstream properties, and the environment.
So to kind of follow up, I guess then the department would make a recommendation as to what zoning approach that they would go through.
Yes, so for example, that developer would say, well, I prefer the PRD. I don't want to do the rigorous components associated with the special circumstances overlay district. The department would advertise it, but certainly the Planning and Zoning Commission would be notified that the department believes the SCODE is preferred versus the PRD. And then the Planning and Zoning Commission can make the recommendation.
Okay. Any other comments, Commissioner Broyles?
I just want to be sure that I'm hearing this correctly. We're only talking about putting those few words in a case-by-case basis, only for number 5 and number 6, not for 1 through 4.
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay.
That is correct.
That is my motion then.
And we have a second. So, and I'm sorry, I apologize. I pushed too many questions there, but we can vote on the motion. So I'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Roll call, please.
Roll call on that one?
It's the letter of recommendation. Yes, sir.
Oh, on the whole thing?
Oh,
We need to vote on the motion
okay.
to add the case by case.
My apologies.
One question.
Let me go ahead and finish this. So I'll start over again. All those in favor of the motion to add the case by case for 5 and 6, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
Abstentions?
No.
1 no. Okay, so moving on, we still have the document in its entirety. Commissioner Helfrey.
Commissioner Depler was trying to ask a question.
Oh,
She was missed.
I can go back. Commissioner Depler?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted some more information what Commissioner Broyles' concern was and why you wanted to add that case by case basis, just, for my knowledge, what your concern is.
Sure. To me, I know that those words were used by Mr. Vonich when he was speaking. We would look at those on a case by case basis, yet it wasn't stated in number 5 and 6. And if there's no legal issues why it couldn't be in those two, I think it would give us another option to look at that again. If there's someone coming in and wanting to secure that property to build on. Does that make sense, Mrs. Depler?
Mayor Boland?
In follow-up to Commissioner Depler's question and Commissioner Broyles' answer, which implicated the legal aspect of this, which obviously has a significant part of this. City Attorney Young, what is your position relative to the addition of those words in the items enumerated?
Again, the review on this for each property, for each designation of this zoning category is going to be done effectively on a case-by-case basis. You still have to look at this and analyze the criteria for each property designated or each area of property designated. So I don't have any heartburn about keeping the language because effectively you're doing that anyway.
Okay. Do you have any heartburn about?
So having the.
Do you have any heartburn about not adding it to any other category?
I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we had a motion, we had a second, and we approved the amendment to add case by case. So now moving on to the document as a whole. If there's any discussion, we can continue that, or I'll need a motion, and this would be a roll call vote.
I move that we accept the document as presented.
Okay. Commissioner Ward, second, Commissioner Cohn. Mayor Boland.
Just a point of information, I want to make sure we're accepting it pursuant to the motion as amended by the preceding motion, which is to add the case by case relative to the items enumerated.
Yes, that is the case.
Thank you.
Mr. Newberry, roll call vote.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Mr. Newberry, when you're ready, you can read our new business correspondence item.
A response to a communication from Anja Baldock, Crown Castle, which is dated March 2nd, 2021 regarding PZ 4-98 AT&T Wireless Services, Inc. that seeks the Planning and Zoning Commission's review and action on a requested change to the existing conditional use permit governing a 90-foot monopole telecommunications tower and related equipment shelter. This tower and shelter is located on the east side of Joe's Way, north of Valley Road. Street address 2028 Joe's Way, St. Louis County, locator number 20U540317, in U non-urban residence district with conditional use permit, thereby allowing for the existing externally mounted array of antennas to extend no more than 15 inches from the surface of the tower, which is currently restricted to no more than 12 inches by the governing conditional use permit, Ward 2.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Bunich, I'll turn it over to you.
Mr. Chair, I believe Mayor Boland has his hand up.
Okay, Mayor Boland.
I would actually like to make a motion to postpone this for 30 days so that the department can determine what impact, if any, the request relative to this particular location and tower relates to the provision of high-speed internet access to residents of our city.
Okay, we have a motion to postpone. I'll need a second. And then maybe Joe, go ahead and do your presentation, or Commissioner Helfrey. Okay, Commissioner Helfrey has a second. So we have a motion and a second.
So is there any way to talk through this now so that it's not tabled? And this is Lindsay Dubuff representing AT&T and Crown Castle.
Mayor Boland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the representative from AT&T, that ultimately depends on what the decision of the commission is. But the reason for my motion is that we previously had the LTE network that was available from LTE network that was available from AT&T to our rural residents. That happened roughly 9 months ago. That has since been scuttled apparently, and that has caused significant issues. And so now we have a request to do something more grand with respect to this particular location. And I would just like to have the commission get the benefit of the history of how this location particularly relates to that LTE program, if any, and so forth before it votes. And so that's the basis for my motion. Thank you.
I guess I would just add to that the reason why we're back on your agenda is because when Crown Castle got approval for the array, they just missed that the plans had this additional 3 inches.
That does not change my motion, but thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to postpone. Let's tackle that first
30 days.
for 30 days. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The item on the table has been postponed by a motion for 30 days. Moving on. We have one other item for consideration. Mr. Newberry.
Final thoughts on work session items on the Town Center Update Team's 24-month review of the current Town Center plan and its 5 main components, with discussion, comments, and questions encouraged on its recommended changes. Wards 1, 4, 5, 7, and 8.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, tonight the Department of Planning is providing you a document that's been updated relative to the discussion that was held at the Planning and Zoning Commission's meeting on March 15th. The intent is not to necessarily debate the items that were described at that aforementioned March 15th meeting, but the department wanted to ensure that it captured your all's thoughts on the topics that were the focus of that particular meeting discussion. So tonight, the department is presenting its summarized comments in the last column of the table, which again reflect discussion from March 15th. If the department is in error on any of them or did not provide enough detail, it would certainly appreciate the input from the Planning and Zoning Commission. The intent after tonight is to prepare the department's recommendation report for the May 3rd Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. So you're looking for our input relative to the added items from March 15th.
Yes, sir. And I do want to mention, and I should have probably did this in my preliminary comments, that there is an area that was discussed at length by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that was the addition of certain properties along the southern boundary of the current town center area. That area was identified as alternate A1, and there was a specific request by the Planning and Zoning Commission to do a comparison. So the final pages of the particular correspondence, the department provides the 5 tracts of land, provides their address, their relative size and acreage, their location, etc., shape, and then does a comparison of those 5 properties relative to what the standards for neighborhood design and guidelines would be in the NU non-urban residential area, the neighborhood edge district, the neighborhood edge transition district, and then just a commentary. So this was a specific request. And again, the department is hoping it captured the intent of that request and has provided information that is helpful to the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Boland.
Joe, thank you for that synopsis. So given that many members of the public may not recognize and understand the ultimate recommendation from the department relative to this particular parcel, after all the analysis is done that you've completed, could you please just orally let the commission and the public know what your recommendation is or will be relative to that parcel?
Certainly, sir. I think the addition of area that has been identified as alternate A1 to the town center boundary is appropriate. And I actually believe that a greater density can be accommodated there with no impact on the surrounding area in terms of development pattern. And I think the appropriate protections and safeguards can be established to ensure that stormwater management is a priority.
Commissioner Helfrey.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So are you stating, Joe, that you do not believe it should be neighborhood edge transition, that it should actually be a higher density zone for a higher density? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, ma'am. And again, I don't want to belabor this because
I'm confused because that goes completely against what the town center, I think, what was discussed by the entire group, the efforts you use for the town center update team. So could you please explain? Thank you.
It does, and certainly the Department of Planning doesn't do that without great thought and consideration. But there are times as a professional planner that the department is going to act on its professional expertise and experience versus the group of, let's say, 18 recommending something. And this is one of those cases. The rationale for not supporting the neighborhood edge transition district is the simple fact that the overall property owned by the Madlingers is approximately 40 acres. 22 of it is the area of the hillside that everyone that took the tour and walked that area knew should not be developed. Therefore, the department and the town center update team did not make that inclusive of the boundary amendment. So really, we're talking about an area of approximately 19 acres. It is relatively flat. It is surrounded on two sides by densities that exceed 5 to 6 units per acre and has direct line of sight to a commercial property. And the commercial property isn't the front, it's the back. And so from those characteristics, particularly the physical characteristics, the department believes that limiting it to potentially 18 lots, and that's assuming the PRD is granted by the city council after recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission, may not be the best approach. I believe in this particular instance, a little variability caused by the neighborhood edge district would be more appropriate.
Thank you, Joe.
Mayor Boland.
So this is a tough one, and I have great respect for Commissioner Cohn, who brought this to the commission's to the forefront of the commission relative to this particular parcel. And I also have great respect for those of you who served on the town center update team, as well as the chair, Vince Loyal. And as Commissioner Helfrey mentioned, this was thought about and decided upon after extensive discussion. And we've also had another parcel to the west of 109 for what is now known as the reserve, that the T-Cut recommended larger lot sizes that we now have potentially lesser of. So in balancing all of these interests, and again, I have great respect for Commissioner Cohn in raising this, I think that given the depth of resident input before the town center update team on this particular area of land would indicate, at least for the present time, and it can always be revisited at some point by action of this commission, but for the present time, I think the best approach would be to leave it as it is, and that's what my vote would be. Thank you. And by leave it as it is, I mean as recommended by the town center update team.
Commissioner Cohn.
I felt that the recommendation by the T-Cut committee, when it was presented to the property owner, you've got one or two choices. You can come in to the town center and be neighborhood transitional edge, or stay non-urban. Was really an unfair way to approach it, and that the need for neighborhood traditional edge is absolutely not necessary in this instance. As Mr. Vunich pointed out, all the areas surrounding it are considerably higher density, as much as 5 dwellings per acre. And when we talk about the input by the community, keep in mind, we got 16,000 households. And I would venture to guess out of those 16,000 households, maybe 1 or 2% is opposed to this when you look at the real survey results. So I kind of object to the idea that the community has spoken. And I still feel very strongly that a 1 acre designation is more than acceptable and even could be entertained a higher density. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and comment on this because I after sitting through those meetings with TCUT and looking at this, the idea behind the whole process was to try to make the transitions better between zoning districts and to get some kind of a flow where you had something that made sense from the higher density town center as you move outward from town center to non-urban. And I think leaving this in as a standalone recommendation from staff as this moves on to council to vote on is a good thing. I don't see this as a bad thing. You have both recommendations, and I think council can take a look at this. But in the spirit of trying to come up with a transition that makes sense, this is a better solution than having, a 18-acre tract that's developed with fewer density that's up against all this high density development and with the commercial tract down the hill. So I think in what we're trying to do with town center, this makes the most sense. And we are not voting on this other than a motion to send this on to council, as I understand this. Am I correct, Joe?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I believe what the mayor is saying is that when the department brings back its information report with recommendation, that in this particular instance, the action of TCUT should be upheld and the department should not offer an alternative. And certainly if the commission makes that motion and votes accordingly, the department will leave it as is, because again, we are staff to the commission, not an independent authority.
Mayor Boland?
I would move to leave the TCUT recommendation as is, to be presented to the city council.
Okay, I have a motion.
Which, if I can just make one clarification.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those of us that get in the beltway on this likely understand the impact of that motion. I just want to make sure that the public understands that motion, which is, if passed, would leave this particular parcel zoned less dense in terms of the number of homes that could be allowed. And again, I'm not suggesting that this couldn't be revisited at some point, but relative to the entirety of the plan that's been presented by TCUT and what the commission has done previously, that is my motion for the time being. And if the commission wants to look at it later, we can do that. But my motion is to support what TCUT has suggested relative to this particular parcel and to move that plan as previously amended by the commission forward to the city council. Thank you.
Seconded.
Commissioner Jackson, second. Okay, so we want to do a voice or a roll call here. Commissioner Broyles? Oh, you're on mute.
For those who were not on the TCUT committee, would it be helpful to have just another view of that A1 property? Do you have that available?
I'll have to defer to Mr. Newberry.
Can't have it available. It will just take me a moment.
Thank you.
While we're waiting on Travis,
Commissioner Helfrey, yes.
while we're waiting on Travis, are we voting on the whole thing? Or are we just voting on this one particular item that we're talking about right now?
The one particular item.
Okay,
alternate A-1.
Got it.
Right, and
Thank you.
I think we can do that by voice vote, and then if that, whether that amendment passes or not, the chair is probably ahead of me on this, we would vote on a roll call basis relative to the T-cut presentation as amended or not, so.
And as I read this, this is going then, Mr. Vunich, I guess I'm asking for clarification just so that I understand what I'm voting. Once we vote on the A1, then we're looking at this entire document and saying, this is what we agree to, everything that's written here, and this will be sent on then to City Council for them to vote on.
No, ma'am, this is just a summary of your comments through the past 2 meetings, ending with March 15th. The department will write a formal information report with recommendation. But before doing that, I wanted to make sure that the comments you all provided were accurately captured, and that if there were any modifications to them, that we could do them tonight, just as we're doing with this particular area called A1.
Wait, okay, I saw the mayor's hand go up first, but wait a second. Because I think he's going to tell me I can't talk about drive-throughs. And I really just want everybody to think about drive-throughs. I think maybe if we can address them maybe as a PRD or something. I just think that if we close the door on that, we're tying our hands on a lot of lots. Okay, I'm done. Go.
And Mr. Chairman, as much
Chair
as
Bowen, yes.
Member Helfrey, that is not germane to the issue, but thank you. Back to Joe's answer. Joe answered very technically, but Commissioner Helfrey hit the nail on the head relative to the vote that is taken on this. Even though Joe will be coming back, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chair Lee, City Attorney Young, or Joe Vinich, my understanding is even though this may not be the final vote of the commission on this, it nevertheless sets the stage for how the commission views whether this particular parcel should be zoned in a way that allows for less homes or more homes. And at the end of the day, my motion is for less homes.
And thank you. And understanding that we are essentially going from 1.5 acres to 1 acre lots. So just to be clear, when you're looking at size, Joe is proposing 1 acre lots. Mayor Boland wants to go back to the neighborhood edge transition, which was 1.5 acres. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We'll try a roll call with, let's do a raise of hands so that Mr. Newberry can see.
We haven't seen that parcel yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the other thing is there may be some members who are not, well, actually, City Attorney Young, does everyone need to be visual to vote?
No, sir, they do not. That is only for the city council.
I'm sorry?
He said
No, they
no.
do not. That rule only applies to city council.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. So back to Chair Lee, the show of hands, given that it is legally permissible for planning and zoning commissioners to vote without being visual, there may be a few that would like to vote without being visual. So
Okay.
I would just respectfully suggest maybe a roll call, and that way we don't have any issues.
Yeah, let's do the roll call on this. Let's go ahead. Here's our tract.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could just narrate.
Mr. Bunich, I'll turn it over to you.
Just very briefly, as you mentioned, this is the tract of land that consists of 5 parcels of ground. It's shown in the beige with the hatchet pattern. I just want to draw attention to the large parcel of ground immediately to the south that shares a contiguous boundary. That is also owned by Mr. Madlinger, and that's the 22 acres, and that's the 5th parcel that's part of the table. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion to exclude the documentation that staff provided for alternate A1, which leaves this at the T-cut 1.5 acre neighborhood edge transitional. So we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Well, if everybody's saying yes, my answer must be no.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
No.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion passes. We will leave this section out of the recommendation. So now we need a motion to approve the entire document. Is that what we're going to do? We can do a roll call on that?
Mr. Chair, I wasn't anticipating a vote on the entirety of the document. I was just, again, asking if there were any areas where the department was incorrect in its assessment. The entire document will be part of the information report that follows on May 3rd.
Okay. So if no action is required, then that brings us to the closing remarks. It's time for a basketball game, isn't it?
Pretty close.
All
And again,
right,
just
Anita.
remember, May 3rd is our next meeting, so we'll see you in about a month's time.
All right, I want to thank everyone. This was a good meeting, and I need a motion to adjourn. Mayor Boland.
Just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, before we adjourn, I just wanted to mention something. Thanks to many people, all of you, our city attorney, the city council, and others, for the first time potentially, and Joe can tell me if I'm wrong on this, perhaps in our city's history, this commission is going to one meeting a month as opposed to two, as are many other of our commissions and committees, which means at the end of the day, we're getting a lot of work done more efficiently. And I just want to thank everyone who has made that possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I need a motion to
I
turn the
move that we
TV on.
adjourn.
Commissioner Helfrey, and second by Councilman Brost. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in 1 month.
Thank you.